Welcome to SecurOTy, the podcast where we dive deep into the dynamic and ever-evolving world of OT security. I'm your host, Sam Kendall, and each episode we will tackle the critical issues and emerging trends shaping the OT landscape today. Joining me is my co-host, John Allen, a strategic OT security consultant and non-exec director at Harpoon. With John's extensive expertise and strategic insight in delivering OT security programs and my knowledge of retaining and attracting and developing talent, we'll unpack the challenges, share real-world solutions and bring you the latest developments in the OT security field. Whether you're a seasoned expert or just getting started in OT security, SecurOTy is your go-to source for thought-provoking discussions and actionable advice. Let's get started. Welcome to the SecurOTy podcast, episode 1 with myself and John. This is a podcast all about OT security. You know, there's a lot of podcasts out there which are, complicated. They talk about kind of certain technical areas in OT security. But the one thing that me and John noticed is, there's a gap in the market for a podcast which simplifies it. OT security does not need to be complicated, and this is what we aim to do in this series. We go through certain topics, challenges, talent and acquisition, stuff like that, key kind of areas in an OT security transformation. And I'm amazed to have John on the pod as a co-host. I'll let John do an introduction to himself in a second, but he is a man who's been there, done it, and got the t-shirt. So yeah, great to have John on the pod as a co-host, and you'll be able to hear firsthand from a man that's been there about challenges that he's faced, how to overcome them. He'll give you his tips to a successful transformation, and stuff like that. So John, I'll hand over to you and just give a quick introduction to yourself, mate. And
Sam, that's very generous of you. So I'm John Allen. My sort of career-wise, I've spent quite a long time predominantly in IT, but the last 23 years of my career was in a very large global pharmaceutical where I was focused on manufacturing. And the last few years, I was asked to pick up an OT security transformation program. So I've got a bit of knowledge and skills there. It's quite interesting. I think my passion in this area is what I'd like to say as a strapline is secure, simple, and sustainable. And I do generally believe when you look out in the market, there's a lot of companies selling a lot of products, and they're very much focused on the fear factor for sales. So I think there's it's not to be ignored, but I think there's a very positive angle to OT security, which is really about securing your supply chain for digital transformation. So I think people need to bear in mind the positive aspects when they go into their board to ask for money.
Yeah, of course, 100%. I mean, that's John is a non-exec director of Harpoon Consulting, and when I first spoke to John, that was a key topic that he brought up, and we're trying to shift the narrative a little bit to not promoting risk and threats, but instead, using OT security for positive change. This will better your organization. So this episode is called The Great Escape, and it's all about the challenges and obstacles that organizations face when delivering an OT security transformation. We wanted to kickstart here because it's just a great topic that opens up, wider conversations into different areas as we move through the series. John recently released an article, which was, why do big companies struggle to implement OT security transformation? And we're going to go through kind of certain topics in that article, and we will post the article after the podcast so people can have a read of that as well. But where we want to start is, around accountability. And I feel like, that's a good topic to start off with. Who is the person leading these OT security transformations? When I'm working with Harpoon and, we're approaching organizations to do some OT consultancy for, 9 times out of 10, I am approaching the CISOs, and we see, multiple articles written by leaders in the OT security tool space, which highlight this as well. So it's clear that the CISO is mainly taking responsibility for OT security. John, from your kind of first-hand experience, do you find the CISO is primarily the leader?
They typically are, and what I'll observe on that is that with CISOs, that the comfort zone is predominantly comes from the IT environment, where you've got a pretty mature mindset in IT security. You have people doing patching and things routinely, and those systems are just designed around a balanced risk scorecard, mature processes, and they're designed to be secure, resilient, and almost digital ready by default. So that's the maturity of the IT market, and the CISO has that accountability. But then when you get into the OT space and you look from a CISO's point of view, this is where I find it quite interesting. So CISO's going with that mindset. Here's a massive bunch of risks, and as an example, the company I used to work in had somewhere around 3,000 IT systems. They're very proud of that. And then they go out and they look at their OT systems and they find 45,000 OT assets. And it's the kind of OSH.T moment where it's sort of realize that their OT estate dwarfs them. And furthermore than that, then applying this just patch it, do it routinely methodology doesn't work, because when you start looking at the OT environment, you've not got systems that are designed to be secure, resilient, and data ready. Because frankly, those systems, some of them are 25 years old, they cost millions of pounds, and they were designed from initially an offline basis. So when you start looking at the OT world, there's a whole base of different issues around securing an OT environment. I've spoken to a lot of CISOs in the organisation. How many of those have actually walked the shop floor? Not many. And they don't necessarily. I'm not criticising them for them, but the shop floor mindset is safety first, operational excellence and efficiency, performance, quality, and so on. The whole concept of walking up to someone in the shop floor or even walk to your neighbour and say, "You've got a CVE of 7," it just doesn't translate. So I think there's quite a significant gap in the understanding of the shop floor from a central organisation's perspective. And as an example, I used to have engineering folks that would be told that they've got to do some patching because they've got a high CVE score. But the reality is some of those systems weren't online, or they had mitigating controls around them. So the engineering folks would go off and they'd look at what their vendors were telling them, and they'd say, "No, you don't need to worry about this particular issue." So there is definitely a line between understanding of the whole engineering mindset and actually the reality of the risk. So it's not all about CVEs, it's about the whole environment and the mitigation you've got around it. So it does create some issues. And frankly, those issues are really around a mindset change and embedding the concept. I used to call it cyber safety, because safety was always first in engineers' mind. It is a good step in that direction. And then helping the organization understand how to translate 45,000 assets of risks into, if you like, impact to a potential crown jewel and a potential loss of revenue or a reputational impact is far more powerful. So we'll probably talk a bit more about KPIs in a minute. But
of course.
I'm not for 1 minute saying the CISOs haven't got it right. They've got it absolutely right. It's a strong methodical process. It's just applying those processes and how to prioritize them is a different discussion. Let's start with business understanding what it actually means to the business.
Okay, no, sounds good. So I guess one question around the CISOs is, if I'm a CISO that's joined, a leading manufacturer, right? I've come in and my background's been heavily within IT security, but I've been passed the baton when it comes to OT security. What would you say is my action plan when I get into the seat? And, what am I looking to do first? How do I process it all? What advice would you give me?
As a starting point for sort of a transformation program, There's multiple things, and as a saying that I really like, which is if you can't measure it, how can you improve it?
Yeah.
And the starting point in any OT security program is discovery, being able to see what you've got out there,
Uh-huh.
and knowing what vulnerabilities they've got, and then furthermore being able to translate those vulnerabilities. So, by example, if you've got 45,000 assets,
Yeah.
you want to be able to say to your business and your board, these particular 100 assets are carrying a likelihood of a cyber attack that could have either a revenue or a reputational impact of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah,
And
of
that
course.
actually brings it into focus because you can't create here's a list of 45,000 problems. You have to create here's a list of X problems that you can address that will reduce your supply chain continuity risk. And I deliberately introduced the term supply chain continuity, but it needs to be spoken in a business language. So
Okay.
that's a starting point. Seeing what you've got, knowing what your risks are. The second point is, whilst a lot of people will say, and I'm not saying I don't agree with it, that the
Hmm.
accountability for cybersecurity is with the CISO.
Yeah.
Well, to an extent, but actually, business continuity is a business risk.
Yeah, of course.
The second stage in getting started is frankly to find a friend in the business that lives in, ideally, if you've got the head of engineering
Yeah.
for the whole business, you're in a good space because
Yeah,
you
of
get them,
course.
take them through that sort of discovery process, and they say, well, let's work together on what our strategy is going to be. Don't turn up with a strategy that says this is what you are going to do, and if you don't do it, I'm going to penalise you for the KPIs that I share with the board. Go to them.
Yeah.
Here's a strategy. Let's understand it. Let's work on it together, and then let's jointly govern it as a solution.
Hmm.
And even more than that, where the sweet spot in this journey is when you get to a position where the center of providing the solutions, which might be, by the way, people, process, and technology. It's not all about technology.
Of course.
And business then see specifically a line of sight to business KPIs that they need to address the risk on. And
Yeah.
the ideal is what I call a pull versus a push model, where the business
Hmm.
is saying, okay, we've got this shelf of solutions. What can I pick first? And we talk about quick wins, I guess, in a minute. That's going to get me a risk reduction. And I
Yeah.
used to use the term risk reward. So you had a load of risks and you had solutions that gave you a reward in risk reduction.
Okay.
And then it. So yeah, data, what have you got?
Yeah.
Joint strategy, and then a set of solutions that can be prioritized by the business.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's just talk about internal sponsors for a bit, right? Point number two, because that's key, right? These guys, if you're delivering an IT security program, 9 times out of 10, you haven't really got to have too many internal sponsors to deal with that, right? Because you're dealing with, IT equipment, you know what you're doing, but dealing with the OT side, like you said, internal sponsors is vitally important to a successful transformation. How I speak to directors of engineering, from time to time regarding Harpoon, and I speak to some which are very on board with OT security, and I speak to others where it really doesn't interest them. It's not part of their day. How do I get a director of engineering on board who isn't interested, doesn't have, doesn't really understand it? What is my best method for that to get these guys on board with what we're trying to do?
I guess there's two answers to that. So one is if you can tag OT security transformation as a foundation to digital transformation.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is, as an example, people will come in and get a company all excited about how they're going to save all this money or improve their productivity through digital. Absolutely, the value's there. But the thing is, in digital, it's like someone saying, look, here's a 1960s car.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put a digital engine in it, and you're going to go down the race course and again go part of the trash because you're missing the foundations. And the foundations in this case are your cybersecurity, cyber safety foundations. So right at the digital ROI discussion,
Yeah.
cyber be factored in. That's designed by security, designed for data, designed for resilience, and important operating model and communications. They all need to be part of the foundation of a digital program. If you've got past that point, you're then in the what I like to call the Y2K scenario, which is there's another IT thing that's not going to happen, and we don't money on it. So you're then into the journey of helping that engineer understand. And again, I'd say use the word cyber safety, because that's where the engineering mindset is. That's where a lot of the processes are, a lot of engineering processes are.
Yeah.
And get real. So you don't need to give them a list of 45,000, just give them a list of 10 and say, these are the types of risks that you carry. And you can explain it. You could explain cyber as in someone's personal life, so they understand what it means to them at home, and then explain it in their work life and what really where it could provide impact. And that's then
very good.
I mean, ultimately, it's a case of waking people up to it, but it's also the case of I hate to say this, but start where you want to finish, which is, well, if you're going to do all this, how are you going to operationalize it? Because that's the bit that a lot forget. So
when we talk about, obviously we mentioned that, CISOs, majority of the time, very technical on the cyber side, they have to also be commercially minded as well, right? And understand the business and why this is important to the business, right? But like we said about, director of engineering there, speaking to the board level, right? These guys might not understand the risk, but you've kind of mentioned how we would do it with director of engineering, and it would be kind of a similar transaction. How do kind of CISOs promote business value to the board? And you mentioned about KPIs and stuff like that. When we look at kind of business KPIs, not just the CISOs focusing on, the vulnerabilities an organization might have, but instead, what is the overall value to the business as a whole?
So ultimately, you're pointing towards in terms of value, which is securing the supply chain for digital transformation. So the board need to understand that there is a foundation required as a digital journey. The second thing, there's other kind of sort of tangible benefits around doing it, which is just knowing what you've got, because you can then apply disciplines of maintenance and upgrades and all sorts of things across the whole engineering estate. So for a company to know their entire estate, that's a big value. And then to be able to, we can now secure it for our supply chain continuity is another good value area.
Okay, no, sounds good. So John, obviously you've delivered this successfully for a leading pharma, and you were there for some time, right? So, I mean, what kind of challenges do you see, main common challenges in organizations that are either starting or have executed an OT security transformation?
So challenge-wise, there's probably two, if you like, startup challenges that I see quite a lot. And one of those is where companies actually know what they want to do, but can't get the funds. So they've got a good idea of the framework, they know what solutions they need to apply, they've got an idea of where to prioritize, but they can't build the business case, which kind of goes to getting a small sample of good data to make it real at the board level. In terms of here's the risk that could happen. It's quite likely. Always use other companies' crisis as a trigger for that, and we can talk a bit about those if you want. The second one is, and I've generally seen this where there's a few conferences I go to. There's one guy that had all the money, they got the budget, but there are just so many places to start that they didn't know where to start. And a lot of companies will go out there because somebody's come in externally and told them to, and buy all this technology and put all of it in, then realise they've got so much data they don't know what to do with it, and actually know what to do with it, they haven't got an operating model to underpin it. So the next extreme is really the slowly but surely approach, which is starting somewhere. Don't try and do everything's important. And the third one I've observed actually in quite a few big global companies, probably about 3 or 4 now, because I coach people in this particular topic, is they got the money, they got the framework, they know what they want to do, but their business is just too busy doing something else, and they don't get it. And that really
Yeah.
comes to business change management, which is where the centre are almost. I can think of a few whipping the business with KPIs that go to the board.
Hmm.
And a particular colleague, particular CISO I was working with, I won't mention the company, that used to use the term watermelon metrics. So they'd send
Watermelon
out,
metrics, okay.
yeah, well, they'd
Nice.
send out the metric from the centre and to the business,
Hmm.
and the business units would send them all back as green, just so they didn't get beaten up by the board. But actually, the metrics are red inside, and they were just hiding it. So
Oh God.
that's which is where you're dictating change to a business that have
Mm.
got other priorities and they don't understand it. So I think the third one is where you really need to get that partnership and business change management in place.
I mean, where would you say, from your experience, that the most, where are organizations mostly at right now, would you say?
Um, well, I'd say becoming more aware, certainly at
Mm.
the board level. There's a lot of publicity around it, and it's now becoming obviously more regulated with
Yeah.
NIS2.
Yeah.
Um, and it can actually have a genuine impact on the stock value of a company, their ability to be cyber secure. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of companies, and there's a fantastic slide out there by Gartner that it's got 5 stages, and it starts with aware, and
Yeah.
eventually you get what they call the oh wow moment. I use a
Hmm.
different word where they do the audit. And it's kind of the sort of firefighting mode into maturity. But 60% of companies, the slide's probably a couple of years old now, are right at that awareness stage, which is usually triggered by, there's either a savvy board that's interested, they've had an event, or somebody else has had an event, or some regulations come along. So there's quite a lot of
Yeah.
companies in that beginning of the journey, and
Okay.
that's where they'll start getting help with how they get the funds. Because I think of those three things I listed, by the way,
Yeah.
sadly, getting money is one of the most common ones.
Yeah.
And if you look at the statistics out there, companies are apparently spending less on cybersecurity now than they were.
Well,
At the same time, they're getting more mature in terms of
yeah.
things like wear and so on. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I mean, people need to see the value, and if that's obviously down to kind of the key stakeholders for the transformation to kind of give that value across to the board, right? But if an organization's OT gets taken down, let's use just a generic food and drink manufacturer. If their systems are down for a couple of weeks, that is a significant loss to revenue. So surely it must be a relatively easy conversation to have with the board for them to go, okay, actually, we should pump a load of money into this.
It should be. And, there's companies out there. The one I'm not going to mention by name, but the large pharmaceutical that got taken out by a destructware version
Yeah.
of a malware virus or a ransomware virus.
Hmm.
And, it took that for them to sort of wake up to doing it. Now, that particular incident took the whole of that company out, the whole of their manufacturing estate out in 15 minutes. And the insurance claim was about $1.4 billion at
Wow.
the end.
Wow.
So they're good examples of that. And again, I personally find it quite saddening when you just read it's all done by the fear. So
Yeah, of course.
they are out there. I think the sort of rewinding and getting to the position where you can say it's an enabling capability for your digital supply chain transformation is a better place to be.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
a lot
And
of
that's
companies.
and that is what Harpoon's doing. So a little plug. um, okay, so picture this, you've got the funding, right? And like you do say, a lot of the market is driven by threat and almost like scare tactics. This organization was taken down for X amount of weeks. It cost them X in revenue, blah, 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 all this, right? Scare tactics to get people to buy into it. Does that, and if we go back to what you said previously, you mentioned that you get a load of tools and you shove them into your organization, and then that's it's all systems go, everything's fine, right? That's not the case. Does that promote organizations to maybe go, all right, let's do something about this, and let's do something about this now. And they just rush into it, don't actually think about what they're doing, and it just prolongs things in the future. What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's almost analysis paralysis from
Yeah,
a tooling view. And there's loads of tools out there you can buy, and lots of good tools as well. So I'm not knocking the industry.
no,
Uh, but I've actually, one particular, again, a large global company, actually got to a stage where it's kind of two steps forwards, one step backwards. They buy all the technology, they look at it, try and implement it, find it quite painful. Then
yeah,
they've got it, they don't know what to do with it. And then they go back and they've literally done this. They've gone back and simplified their tool set. So taking tools out and reduce them, because
yeah,
there's loads of IT-based tools that do OT. There's OT-based tools that don't do IT, and lots to select from. So I think that does create a level of paralysis for a company, because frankly, and you can genericize this, a lot of companies will buy tools because they want one of those tools,
yeah, of
but
course.
they don't think about what are they going to do, how much data do they have to feed the beast with to get value out of it. So how much
Mm,
manual operation have they got to do, and how up to date is that? And then secondly, when they've got it working, what's the operating model to act on that information? So if you've got a tool that's telling you you've got vulnerabilities, well, whose accountability is it in OT or IT to deal with those vulnerabilities? So there's that whole stage of, like I said, you need to start where you're going to finish, and you
yeah,
have to, a good mindset. It's sort of input, process, outcome. Well, where are you going to be at the end of this journey,
yeah,
and then you're going to sustain the value for it as well. So I think, tooling wise, there's probably the tools that can help you discover what you've got. I think are invaluable, because
mm,
you can literally pay some of those big four companies thousands of pounds per site to do an audit that will go out of date in days. Right?
yeah, of course.
If you have capability, that's a great way of risk management and continuous risk management. So I think those tools are important.
Yeah,
Um, so I'm not saying don't buy tools. I'm just saying think about which tools you take. And
mm,
as an example, um, IDAM is our identity and access management
yeah,
credentials.
yeah,
Well, something like 80% of attacks are as a result of a credentials breach. So there's
yeah, of
probably
course.
some in protecting your privileged access management accounts, but you can go beyond tools. Little things like educating somebody on the shop floor. Now, someone on the shop floor, by the way, might not even have email. That's a real example in a factory environment,
Mm,
and they have no idea what this thing's about. But just
yeah,
educate people in home life and work life,
mm,
and that 60% of malware comes in through people,
yeah.
is another great step you can take to sort of get value. It doesn't cost a lot to, go out to a site and just talk to people. So
No,
yeah,
no, no, of course, of course. You know what? One thing that you are, great at, and it's ever since we started speaking, months ago, it was always one thing that you massively highlighted, and it's a key part of the program is once you have delivered what you want to deliver, and training and awareness will fall into this, it's where do you go now, right? So the program has ran, you have what you think is a good OT posture, right? What does that operating model look like once the program's finished?
yeah. So yeah, the easy to fall in mindset, and I used to be a program director, is I've done the program, I've got it signed off, I'm gone, right? And
Yeah,
and I remind people that I can't remember what it was, but it's a stupid figure. Like 80% of the cost of an asset is in service.
yeah,
So actually moving from a programmatic mode to service mode, which brings you into things to consider. The first thing is continuous risk management. Every day, something's going to get plugged in, unplugged, or changed. Secondly, is part of that continuous risk management is threat intelligence, is what's going on in the outside world. So you need to think about how your risk landscape is changing, and actually recognize that your risk profile is going to be like a roller coaster.
yeah,
It change every day as some activist out in some country says, I'm going to target this particular type of environment. So that's a bit about your risk management, continuous risk management posture. But your second piece is, and I touched on earlier on, is the operating model. and that's people, process, and technology. So what people are you going to need to sustain this value? So I've worked with companies where, and it's been a good balance, where the actual OT cybersecurity environment was built in engineering.
Wow.
So I had a group of people, and their job was effectively continuous risk management and change.
Yeah.
You won't get it all in one hit. You probably have tails of change to do as well. So the people aspect, what capabilities you're going to need, maybe in the center, maybe in the site, which is always a discussion that's painful. And then the processes. So there's loads of processes, and I'm familiar with frameworks like ITIL, but it doesn't matter. But in recovery management backup, is that all going to be run from the center? Because I've worked with companies that won't let IT touch their SCADA systems because these guys don't get D and OE and stuff like that. Yeah. So you then got that balance. But does the central IT group provide the support for like peripheral services like networks, backup servers, storage servers, and so on? And then the OT folks, so they manage the life cycle, for better choice of word. And life cycle starts right at vendor management through to retirement of their devices and have accountabilities. Because at the moment, a lot of the OT people won't think about, well, I've got accountability for making sure this is backed up and it's patched and so on. And then your technology is kind of what technology you're going to put in and who's going to run it, who's accountable for the findings of it. And then I would also suggest there's a little bit to think about, which is, and I guess things like NIS2 coming along might force the handle on this bit, is, well, we've got a lot of, if you like, cybersecurity standards we could adopt, so IEC 66243, use of frameworks. Are we going to start applying those standards only to new assets? So bear in mind, when you buy a manufacturing line, you could be paying hundreds of millions of pounds for a line that's going to have a life cycle of 20 years. Are you going to insist that all machines that are now purchased are built to a certain standard of controls as well? So it's that whole ongoing environment of people, process, and technology and standards to an extent that needs to be thought through. Because otherwise, you've thrown, I don't know, £100 million in a very large global company easily at the problem, and the value just decays.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's obviously with my background in talent acquisition and understanding the cyber market, people can be a challenge. Finding the real specialist resource to really understand the technology can be tough, right? So, I mean, from your first-hand experience, what advice would you give to a company which needs to increase the amount of people that are focused on OT security in an organization, right? What could they do?
This sounds like the theme for another podcast.
It is.
People-wise, it's interesting because I'll go back to partnership again. There's a partnership of the central accountability is around things like SIEM and a SOC type capability.
Yeah.
But having a central team that just do traditional IT SOCs and SIEMs isn't good value because they won't. What they do is they tell the business they've got a problem, but they won't understand the context. Won't necessarily be able to advise them what to do with it. So growing the maturity in your center of just going out and going to the shop floor and getting to know the guys and working with them and sharing that problem with them. And then the next challenge is, so where do you source those OT cyber savvy people from? And it's so easy for me to say this, and I'm still not work for the answer out. But I think a lot of it is engineering, and engineering is quite a limited pool of capabilities. So if you do it really well, you might have another problem that you haven't got the right level of engineers.
Yeah,
I guess my view is somebody with an engineering shop floor background is a great person to move into cybersecurity. Somebody in IT with a great security background needs to spend some time in OT if they're going to add value in that particular area.
Yeah, of course.
Combination of resources there.
And we won't go into too much detail because, like we said, that is a big topic for one of our conversations in a few weeks' time. A key area that we want to look at ourselves at Harpoon, and also, we'll chew the fat on that as well. I guess we've covered quite a lot, right? We've covered, the basis of the article, and like I said, we will release the article after the podcast. and you guys can take a look at that. And also, I'm sure John wouldn't mind if you fire him some questions. And also, just to let you guys know as well, we are actually currently offering a free OT security health check to organizations, where, you know, John would come in and have a look at your current strategy and offer you some advice and support as to how you can get to where you want to be. If you need to reach out to me regarding that, and we can set that up. But is there anything that you want to talk about, John, or do you think we've covered most of it? You know, anything that kind of springs to mind that we haven't covered?
No, I guess sort of my summary would be is it's the slowly but surely message again, which is there's this kind of knee-jerk reaction, and in a Six Sigma sense, it's called tempering, which is where you see something's going the wrong way and you throw everything at it and you make it worse.
Yeah.
And I think in a journey on a cybersecurity program, whether you started or starting, picking a few value add areas that are going to reduce your risk is a good place to start. And that doesn't mean going out and buying loads of technology, but it probably does mean you got to know what you've got out there to start and what your vulnerability is. But don't forget, it's about people, process, and technology. Technology on its own won't solve it. When we get to the stage, and I keep saying this to Sam, my most annoying question what we tend to do in this industry, and I'm not criticizing this, but we come up, it's a bit like COVID. We get another strand come out and we find another vaccination for it. And then the next one comes out and we find another one. So it's kind of a perpetual sustaining of the problem. That, the ultimate question to me, and when I answer it, I shall retire, is how do you resolve, how do you cure the problem? And I think the technologies are sort of helping us get there. People say, will AI get there or not? I don't know. I'm a bit nervous about AI making decisions on safety systems in a manufacturing environment. But
of course.
It's that mindset. It's almost a simple, secure, and sustainable mindset, which is actually what's the biggest thing you can do? Make it simple and get the best risk reduction. It can't be all about catching everything all at the same time.
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, there you go, guys. There's John Allen's perspective from a man who's been there and done it and got the t-shirt in terms of an OT transformation. Like I said, this is the start of a series where we discuss other topics. Episode 2, I think it might be the training and awareness talent acquisition podcast, where it might be, the shoes might switch. John might be peppering me with questions. I think that'll be a more mutual discussion. But obviously, you needed to hear from John regarding this episode. But yeah, guys, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got a lot of benefit from it as well. And we'll both catch you on the next pod.